Snow had barely begun falling when my sister's nails dug into my arm and shoved me toward the basement door, the cold metal knob slamming against my hip as she hissed through clenched teeth. "If you won't sign tonight, Maya, then you can freeze down there with him." Behind her, my parents stood in the warm glow of Christmas lights like actors trapped in a holiday postcard, their faces calm, distant, almost bored, while the smell of cinnamon candles and pine drifted through the hallway. It should have been the safest night of the year. Instead, it was the night my own family locked me and my 84-year-old grandfather in the basement and walked away. The door slammed shut with a hollow thud that echoed down the wooden steps, and a moment later the bolt slid into place with a metallic click that sounded final, deliberate, and terrifyingly casual. For a few seconds I just stood there in the darkness, the cold air rushing down the stairwell like water pouring into a cave, my breath catching somewhere between disbelief and anger. Snow pressed softly against the basement window above us, and I realized that the only sound left in the house was the faint jingle of Christmas music still playing upstairs as if nothing had happened. When the shock finally loosened its grip on my lungs, I reached for my grandfather, Elias Ward, whose thin frame trembled beside me like a fragile branch in winter wind. "Easy," I whispered, guiding him carefully down the creaking steps. Each wooden plank groaned beneath our weight, and the air smelled of damp concrete and forgotten years. When my hand brushed the wall, I found the light switch and flipped it. The bulb flickered twice before casting a weak orange glow across the basement, revealing boxes of old decorations, broken chairs, dusty trunks, and a long stone wall that looked older than the rest of the house. Elias didn't look at the clutter or the stairs or even the locked door above us. He stared only at that wall, his breathing uneven, as if something buried behind those stones had just awakened. I pounded once on the door anyway, though I knew it was useless. Silence answered me. No footsteps, no voices, not even the courtesy of hesitation. My parents had not lingered to reconsider. Vanessa had suggested handling the situation tonight so Christmas could continue peacefully, and they had agreed without argument, as if locking their daughter and an elderly man in a freezing basement was simply another item on the holiday checklist. "Light switch," Elias murmured weakly, though it was already glowing above us. His hand tightened around my wrist, pulling my attention back to him. "Maya," he whispered, voice thin but urgent. "They don't know what's behind that wall." I stared at him, confusion replacing anger. "What do you mean?" I asked, kneeling beside him as he sank slowly onto an old trunk. His fingers trembled so violently that I wrapped my scarf around his shoulders without thinking. "Granddad, what's behind the wall?" For a moment he looked frightened, the kind of fear that comes from memories rather than immediate danger, and then something steadier settled into his expression, like a man finally accepting that a secret had lived too long in silence. "I never wanted you to know," he said quietly, pushing himself to his feet again. I supported him as we crossed the cold concrete floor together until we stood in front of the far wall. He traced his fingertips along the mortar between the stones until they stopped at one darker than the rest. "This one," he murmured, pressing his palm against it. "Push." I hesitated, wondering if the cold had confused him, but the urgency in his eyes left no room for doubt. When I pushed, the stone shifted inward with a low grinding sound and a hollow pocket opened behind it. Inside the cavity sat a small black metal tin, dented with age and colder than the surrounding stone. Elias lifted it with both hands, holding it as carefully as if it were made of glass. When he opened the lid, several folded papers lay inside, yellowed and fragile with time. The first was a birth certificate bearing a name I had never heard before, Elias Ward. My grandfather's voice softened when I looked at him in confusion. "That," he said, "is who I really am." The second document was an adoption decree dated 1946, transferring the child named Elias Ward into the care of the Bennett family. My throat tightened. The third item was a photograph of a young man in a laboratory coat standing beside unfamiliar scientific equipment, his dark hair neatly combed and his sharp eyes strangely familiar. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement air. "Who is he?" I whispered. "My father," Elias replied. "Dr. Adrian Ward." He paused, his gaze drifting back to the stone wall as if it carried the echo of a distant past. a brilliant scientist, and a man who died because he refused to let his work become a weapon. The basement suddenly felt smaller, colder, and far more dangerous than it had moments earlier. "What kind of work?" I asked quietly. Elias hesitated, then answered in a voice so low it almost vanished into the humming light above us. "A project they later called Nova." The word settled between us like a stone sinking through water. He explained that he had been hidden as a child, given a new name and life so no one could connect him to the research his father had tried to protect. "And Vanessa?" I asked slowly. "What does she know?" Elias shook his head. "Very little. Years ago she found an old notebook with false notes about the project, a decoy I left behind. It was enough to make her curious, enough to make her greedy." His tired eyes met mine with quiet certainty. "She believes the house is valuable because of money. She has no idea what your great-grandfather died to keep safe." For several seconds I said nothing, absorbing the weight of what he had just revealed. My parents had betrayed us for a house they barely understood, and my sister had been chasing a rumor she didn't comprehend. "We're getting you out of here," I finally said, helping him back toward the stairs. He nodded once, though his expression remained troubled. As if the universe had decided the night had not yet grown strange enough, footsteps crunched across the snow outside the basement window, followed by a knock on the door above us. "Maya," a voice called. "You down there?" Relief flooded through me so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. "Daniel," I shouted, pounding on the door. "We're in the basement." A moment later, the bolt slid open, warm air rushing down the stairs as Daniel Cross appeared at the top, his face pale with shock. "What the hell happened?" he demanded as he hurried down to help Elias up. We climbed back into the glowing living room where the Christmas tree still sparkled as if the house itself refused to acknowledge what had happened. Daniel wrapped his coat around Elias and looked at me again, confusion written across every line of his face. I handed him the tin box. He opened it carefully, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief as he read the documents. "Maya," he whispered, "this is huge." Elias lowered himself onto the couch, exhaustion pulling at his voice. "Bigger than they know," he said softly. "And they will come back." Daniel stepped closer, his tone steady and protective as he looked at both of us. "You're not alone," he promised. In that moment, surrounded by Christmas lights and betrayal, I understood that the secret hidden behind that stone wall was more than a forgotten birth certificate. It was the beginning of a fight my family had started decades ago, and somehow, impossibly, it was now my responsibility to finish. Daniel stayed through the night, pacing between the kitchen and the living room while the snowstorm outside thickened into a white curtain that swallowed the quiet street. The house had grown strangely hollow, the warmth of the Christmas lights now feeling like a cruel decoration rather than comfort. Elias slept under 2 blankets on the couch, though his rest was restless, broken by small murmured fragments of memory that drifted through the room like half-forgotten prayers. I sat at the dining table with the tin box open before me, the fragile papers spread across the wood while the wind scratched gently against the windows as if something outside were trying to listen. Every few minutes my eyes drifted toward the front door, expecting it to burst open with Vanessa's fury or my father's cold authority. But the hours crept by without interruption until the clock on the microwave clicked quietly to 6 a.m., the storm finally beginning to fade. Daniel set a cup of tea in front of me that I barely touched. His voice was calm but firm when he said, "We can't stay here today." I already knew that, yet the idea of leaving felt like surrender, like handing the house to Vanessa exactly the way she wanted. "Where would we even go?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "My place. It's 2 streets over, there's a guest room, and it's safe." I looked toward the couch where Elias slept, his thin chest rising slowly beneath the blanket, and the anger I had been holding all night hardened into something clearer. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about survival. I nodded. "Okay, help me pack." Daniel went outside to warm the car while I moved through the house collecting the bare essentials. Medication, warm clothes, the tin box wrapped carefully inside my scarf. Every room I stepped into felt unfamiliar now, like walking through a museum of a life that had already ended. The kitchen table still held the plates from dinner the night before, the cinnamon rolls untouched beside a half-empty mug of cocoa. I paused there for a moment, hearing faint echoes of old Christmas mornings when laughter had filled the room and Vanessa hadn't yet learned how to turn everything into a contest. Maybe the signs had always been there, and I had simply refused to see them. Maya. Elias's voice broke my thoughts. I hurried back to the living room where he was trying to stand. No, don't, I said quickly, reaching for him. I'll get Daniel. He shook his head stubbornly. I need to stand on my own. I won't let them push me into a corner again. I slipped his arm over my shoulder and helped him upright, his weight lighter than it should have been, his breath shallow but determined. We must be careful today, he murmured as we shuffled toward the hallway. Your parents will be angry. Vanessa will be furious. I tightened my grip on his arm. Let them be angry, I said quietly. They lost the right to tell me anything when they locked us in that basement. Before he could answer, headlights swept across the living room window. The beam of white light cut through the soft glow of the Christmas tree and froze both of us where we stood. Daniel stepped back through the front door just then, brushing snow from his coat. His expression shifted the moment he saw the lights outside. Maya, he said under his breath, we need to leave now. I moved toward the door anyway, dread tightening in my chest. When I looked through the glass, I saw a dark SUV rolling slowly into the driveway, its tinted windows reflecting the gray morning sky. The first door opened, and Vanessa stepped out, wrapped in a white coat that made her look like she was arriving at a winter gala instead of a confrontation. My parents followed behind her, their faces stiff with tension, and then the fourth door opened. A tall man in a black coat stepped onto the snow, his posture calm, deliberate, unsettling in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Even before the doorbell rang, I knew this man had not come for Christmas reconciliation. Vanessa's smile was waiting for me when I opened the door. Good morning, sis, she said sweetly, though the sharp edge in her eyes betrayed the performance. My mother stood just behind her, red-eyed but rigid, while my father refused to meet my gaze entirely. The man in black looked past me into the house as if evaluating the room. What do you want? I asked, my voice colder than I expected. Vanessa tilted her head with exaggerated disappointment. Well, for starters, an apology. You made Mom cry all night. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I made her cry, I repeated. You locked us in the basement. My father finally spoke, his tone clipped and defensive. You were hysterical, Maya. We didn't want you hurting yourself or your grandfather. Daniel stepped forward beside me. They left him in freezing temperatures, he said flatly. My mother attempted a weak smile. Honey, stop making this bigger than it is. We just want what's best for everyone. I felt something bitter rise in my throat. That's why you wanted me to sign the house over on Christmas Eve? She blinked, caught between excuses, while Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. Here we go again, she muttered. My father's gaze shifted suddenly to the tin box in my hands. What's that? He asked sharply. Before I could answer, the man in the black coat stepped forward for the first time, his voice low and steady. That, he said, is why we are here. The room seemed to shrink around his words. Vanessa gestured proudly toward him. This is Victor Hale, she announced. He works with people who understand the true value of this house. Elias inhaled sharply behind me. Daniel leaned closer and whispered, Do you know him? I shook my head, but Elias spoke before I could say anything else. I do, he said quietly. Hale's eyes lifted and settled on him with unsettling recognition. It has been a long time, Elias Ward, he replied. My mother frowned in confusion. Ward? His name is Bennett. Vanessa shot her an irritated look, but Hale ignored them both. His attention remained fixed on Elias as he said calmly, Your father had something that belonged to us. I have come to retrieve it. The words struck like ice water. My parents stared between us, lost and bewildered, but Vanessa's expression lit with greedy excitement. See? She said triumphantly. I told you there was something hidden here. Daniel moved instinctively between me and Hale. You need to leave, he said firmly. Hale raised one eyebrow with faint amusement. I don't take instructions from neighbors. Elias's hand tightened on my arm. Maya, he whispered urgently, take the box. In that instant, the truth became painfully clear. This was no longer a family argument about inheritance. Whatever Victor Hale wanted had been buried in this house long before Vanessa's greed ever surfaced, and now that it had been uncovered, there was no simple way to put it back. The moment Elias whispered for me to take the box, the tension in the living room shifted from uncomfortable to dangerous. Daniel stepped forward instinctively, his shoulders squared as if he could physically block the man in black from moving any closer. Victor Hale did not raise his voice or his hands, yet the calm confidence in his posture made it clear he did not feel threatened by anyone in the room. His gaze slid from Elias to the tin box in my hands and then back again, as if measuring time rather than distance. "You can run," he said quietly, "but you cannot hide the truth forever. It has a way of resurfacing." I didn't answer him. Instead, I tightened my grip on the tin box, grabbed the small bag I had packed, and moved toward the back door. "We're leaving," I said firmly. My father stepped in front of the couch where Elias stood. "He's not going anywhere," he snapped, though the confidence in his voice sounded thinner than usual. Daniel's hand shot out and caught my father's arm. "Back off," he said. Hale watched the brief struggle with mild interest, like someone observing a minor inconvenience rather than a confrontation. Elias coughed sharply, the sound reminding me how fragile he truly was. That was all the clarity I needed. I slipped my arm around him and guided him toward the back door while Daniel opened it, cold wind spilling into the kitchen. "You're making a mistake," Vanessa called after us, her voice laced with both anger and excitement. "You have no idea what you're walking away from." I paused only long enough to look back at her. "You're right," I said quietly, "but I know exactly what I'm walking away from." We stepped into the swirling snow, the cold biting instantly through my coat. Daniel hurried ahead to his car while I helped Elias across the yard. Behind us, I could hear voices rising inside the house, my parents arguing with Vanessa and Hale speaking calmly over them all. The sound of the door slamming behind us felt like the closing of a chapter I had spent years pretending still had hope. Daniel's car was already running, its engine humming softly as we climbed inside. I settled Elias carefully in the back seat beside me while Daniel slid behind the wheel. As the car pulled away, I glanced back at the house just in time to see Hale step onto the porch, his black coat moving in the wind like a dark flag. He didn't chase us. He simply watched. Snow muffled the world as we drove through the quiet streets. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight with concentration. "Where to?" he asked after a moment. I hesitated, realizing that for the first time in my life I truly didn't know where home was. "Your place," I said finally. "Just for now." He nodded once and turned the car toward the next street. His house was small but warm, the heat rushing over us as we stepped inside. I helped Elias onto the couch while Daniel locked the door behind us and closed the curtains with careful precision. "No one's stepping foot in here without my say," he said. For a moment, I almost believed it. But Elias shook his head slowly. "If Hale is involved," he murmured, "no place is truly safe." Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, folding his arms. "Then we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with," he said. "Who is that guy and why does he know your real name?" Elias looked at the tin box resting on the coffee table and sighed heavily, as though the years he had carried the secret had suddenly returned all at once. "Because he was there," he said quietly. "He was part of the group that tried to take my father's work." I felt the room grow colder despite the heater running. "Project Nova," I said slowly. Elias nodded. "Your great-grandfather discovered a way to create a limitless clean energy source, something that could power cities without pollution or depletion. But companies like Hale's didn't see energy. They saw control." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "So Hale wants the blueprint." Elias looked at me instead of answering. "He believes it is hidden in the house." The weight of that statement settled over the room. I thought about Vanessa's obsession with the property, the way she had searched every attic and drawer for years. She had been looking for money. Hale was looking for something far more dangerous. Daniel broke the silence first. "Then we need help," he said decisively. He pulled out his phone and typed quickly. "I know someone. Rebecca Pierce, lawyer in Savannah. She handled my aunt's estate case last year. Smart and not easily intimidated." Within seconds, the screen lit up with a reply. Daniel glanced at it and gave a small nod. "She says bring every document you have. An hour later, the three of us stood in Rebecca Pierce's office, the city outside still wrapped in pale winter light. Rebecca herself was exactly what Daniel had described, sharp-eyed, composed, and completely unimpressed by drama. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything from the basement to Hale's visit. When I finished, she studied the papers from the tin box with a long, thoughtful silence. "Your family didn't just cross a line," she said finally. "They jumped off a cliff." My chest tightened. "You believe me?" She looked up sharply. "Believe you. Your sister committed coercion. Your parents enabled false imprisonment. And if this Victor Hale is connected to corporate espionage, the situation becomes far more serious." Elias cleared his throat softly. "Hale will come back," he said. Rebecca nodded as though she had already expected that answer. "Then we prepare," she replied calmly. "First, we file protective orders for you and Maya. Second, we secure the property legally before anyone else tries to claim it. And third," her eyes moved to the photograph of Adrian Ward resting on the desk, "we make sure the truth about Project Nova doesn't disappear again." For the first time since the basement door had slammed shut, I felt something other than fear. It was small and fragile, but unmistakably real. Hope. Rebecca's office smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, the kind of quiet, orderly space that made chaos feel slightly more manageable simply by existing. Yet even there, with the city traffic humming faintly beyond the tall windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm had only just begun. Rebecca moved through the stack of documents from the tin box with careful precision, occasionally making notes in the margins of a yellow legal pad. Daniel leaned against the far wall with his arms folded, watching the door as if he expected it to burst open at any moment. Elias sat beside me, his hands resting on his cane, the lines in his face deeper than they had been the night before. Rebecca finally set the papers down and looked directly at me. "Maya, there are two separate issues happening at the same time," she said calmly. "Your family's attempt to force you to transfer ownership of the house is one. That alone could involve charges like fraud, coercion, and elder abuse. But Victor Hale—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Victor Hale changes the scale of the problem." Daniel shifted slightly. "Meaning?" he asked. "Meaning if the history your grandfather described is accurate," Rebecca replied. "Then this isn't just about property anymore. It's about intellectual property that could have enormous financial and political value." She tapped the photograph of Adrian Ward with one finger. "And people who chase that kind of value rarely stop politely when someone says no." Elias nodded slowly. "Hale never stopped," he murmured. "He waited." The word hung in the room like a warning. I looked down at the tin box again, feeling its weight in my hands as though it carried more than paper. "So what do we do?" I asked quietly. Rebecca slid a document across the desk toward me. "First, we make sure your sister and parents can't come near you or Elias legally. This is a temporary protective order. Once it's filed, any attempt to intimidate or approach you becomes a criminal matter." Daniel gave a small approving nod. "Good," he said. "They've done enough damage already." Rebecca wasn't finished. She leaned back slightly, studying the photograph again before continuing. "Second, we prepare for Victor Hale. People like him rely on silence and confusion. If we bring this story into the open legally, his room to maneuver becomes smaller." My mother's voice echoed faintly in my mind from earlier that morning, pleading for calm, insisting everything had been misunderstood. But I had seen Hale's eyes. There had been nothing misunderstood in them, only intent. "Will he come after us?" I asked. Rebecca didn't sugarcoat her answer. "Yes," she said plainly. "He will." For a moment the room went completely quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. I felt Daniel's hand settle briefly on my shoulder, a silent reassurance that I wasn't facing this alone. Rebecca gathered the papers again and slid them back into the tin box. "But Hale also made a mistake," she continued. "By showing up personally, he revealed that whatever he wants is close. Desperation leads to risk, and risk creates evidence." She looked directly at Elias. "You said your father hid clues to the project in the house. Do you know where the actual design might be?" Elias was silent for a long moment. Then he slowly reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper I had never seen before. When he placed it on the desk and opened it carefully, I realized it was older than any of the documents in the tin box. The ink had faded in places, but the handwriting was clear and deliberate. "My father left this note for me," Elias said softly. "It arrived when I was 23 years old. I never followed its instructions because I was afraid of exactly what is happening now." I leaned closer to read the words. "If you are reading this, Elias, it means they found me. I could not destroy Nova, so I divided it. One half they will case. The other half they will never know exists." Rebecca read the line silently, her eyes narrowing. "Divided?" she asked. Elias nodded. "The blueprint Hale believes exists is incomplete. The real design was hidden somewhere else." Daniel exhaled slowly. "So Hale's been chasing half a puzzle for decades." "Yes," Elias said. "And he believes the missing half is still somewhere in the house." Rebecca tapped the desk lightly. "Which means if we secure the house legally, we control access to whatever your father left behind." At that exact moment, my phone vibrated on the desk. The unknown number made my stomach tighten before I even opened the message. The text contained only a single sentence. "Come home, Maya. We need to talk." Another message appeared seconds later. "Bring Grandpa. Let's end this before it gets worse." Daniel leaned over my shoulder and read the screen. His expression darkened immediately. "Don't answer," he said. But a third message arrived before I could even lock the phone. "Carla is upset. You owe the family this conversation." I stared at the screen, a strange mixture of anger and sadness rising in my chest. Vanessa was still pretending this was just another argument she could manipulate into her favor. But something in the timing felt wrong. Rebecca must have sensed it too because she said quietly, "Your sister doesn't sound worried. She sounds confident." Daniel frowned. "Confident about what?" As if answering the question, another message appeared. This time it included a photograph. The front door of my house stood wide open, snow blowing across the hallway floor. Daniel swore under his breath. "Someone's already inside." I felt the room tilt slightly as the reality settled in. Rebecca's eyes sharpened instantly. "That isn't your sister's style," she said. "If Victor Hale believes the second half of Nova is in that house, he won't wait for permission." Elias closed his eyes slowly, as though a memory he had hoped would stay buried had finally returned. When he opened them again, the fear in his voice was unmistakable. "Hale has already started searching," he said. Elias's words settled over the room like the final note of a warning bell, vibrating quietly through the silence that followed. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled beneath her chin as she processed the photograph on my phone again. Daniel paced once across the office floor and back, the tension in his shoulders making every movement deliberate. I stared at the image of my open front door, snow drifting across the threshold like something abandoned. That house had once held birthdays, laughter, quiet evenings with Elias telling stories about history and science, and the way the world could change if people simply chose to do better. Now someone was tearing it apart. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice calm but sharper than before. "If Hale is already searching the house, that means two things. First, he believes time is running out. Second, he believes Maya is the only person who can confirm whether what he finds is real." Daniel stopped pacing immediately, meaning he'll come for her next, he said. Elias nodded slowly. "Hale has always believed pressure reveals truth. He will push until something breaks." My phone vibrated again. This time the message was shorter. "You should come see what we found." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. The cold certainty in those words felt unmistakably like Hale. Daniel glanced at Rebecca. "We can't just sit here waiting for him to show up," he said. "If he's tearing the house apart, we need to know what he's after." Rebecca considered this for a moment before answering. "And walking straight into his search would do exactly what he wants, force Maya to reveal what matters." She turned her attention to Elias again. "Your father's note said the second half was hidden somewhere else. Did he give you any clue where?" Elias closed his eyes briefly, as though replaying an old memory. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but steady. "He wrote another line on the back of that note years later. I only noticed it recently." He turned the fragile paper over on Rebecca's desk. Under the lamplight, faint ink appeared, almost invisible at first. The door is not where it seems. Daniel frowned. That sounds like a riddle. Rebecca studied the line carefully. Or a warning, she said. If Hale thinks the blueprint is hidden inside the house itself, your father might have hidden the entrance somewhere unexpected. I thought about the rooms, the attic, the basement wall we had already opened. None of them felt like the place where a brilliant scientist would hide the most important work of his life. What if it isn't inside at all? I said slowly. Elias's eyes lifted to mine with sudden recognition. The garden, he whispered. Rebecca blinked. What garden? The old pecan tree, Elias replied. Adrian loved that tree. He planted it himself the year before the project began. I always assumed it was just a memory, but perhaps it was something more. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. So the second half of Nova might be buried under a tree, or hidden within it somehow, Rebecca added thoughtfully. The idea seemed almost too simple, yet the moment Elias said it, something in my mind clicked. That tree had always been strangely protected. My father refused to let anyone cut it down even when it dropped branches across the yard. Vanessa hated it because it made the garden messy. I had climbed it as a child, never once wondering why Elias always watched with quiet attention. Before anyone could say more, Rebecca's phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced down at the screen and her expression changed instantly. Security just called, she said. Someone is downstairs asking for Maya. Daniel straightened. Hale? Rebecca shook her head slowly. No, your father. My stomach twisted. Dad? Rebecca nodded. He says he needs to talk before things get out of control. Daniel let out a low breath. Things are already out of control. Elias leaned forward slightly, his voice tired but clear. If James came here alone, it means he is frightened. Or desperate, Rebecca added. For a moment, none of us spoke. The thought of seeing my father again after everything that had happened felt surreal. Part of me still wanted him to walk into the room and say he had made a terrible mistake. But the photograph of the open house door lingered in my mind. Rebecca stood. I'll bring him up, she said, then paused at the door. But we stay careful. A few minutes later, my father stepped into the office. Snow clung to his coat and his hair looked windblown, but the rigid authority he usually carried had been replaced by something else entirely, fear. Maya, he said, his voice rougher than I had ever heard it. You have to listen to me. Daniel crossed his arms immediately. Start talking, he said. My father looked around the room, taking in Elias, Rebecca, and the tin box on the desk. That man, Hale, he began slowly. Vanessa invited him into the house this morning because she thought he would help her prove the property had hidden value. But when he started tearing through the walls and the basement, I realized something was very wrong. Rebecca watched him carefully. What did he find? Nothing yet, my father admitted. But he's convinced something is there. And now, he hesitated, his eyes finally meeting mine. Now he says the only person who can help him find it is you. A heavy silence filled the office. Daniel spoke first. So he sent you here to bring her back. My father didn't deny it. He said if I convinced Maya to return willingly, he'd leave the rest of us alone. Elias let out a soft, bitter laugh. Hale never leaves witnesses. My father's shoulders sagged. I know that now. I studied his face, searching for the man who had once carried me on his shoulders during summer parades. Instead, I saw someone tired, frightened, and finally aware of the danger he had invited into our lives. He's still at the house, my father continued quietly, and he's not planning to leave. Daniel looked at Rebecca. Then we have two choices, he said. Either we stay here and wait for him to come after us, or we get to that tree before he does. Rebecca nodded slowly, and in that moment, every person in the room understood that the next decision would decide far more than the fate of a house. It would decide the fate of the truth Elias had protected for 40 years. The decision settled over the room with the quiet weight of inevitability. Outside Rebecca's office windows, the gray winter sky had begun to darken toward evening, the faint glow of streetlights flickering on below. For a moment no one spoke, as if each of us understood that whatever happened next would close the door on the life we had known before the basement door slammed shut the night before. Daniel broke the silence first. "If Hale is already inside the house, we won't get near the tree through the yard," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "But if he's focused on the building itself, he might not even be watching the garden." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "He's chasing what he believes is hidden in the structure," she agreed. "That assumption could buy us a small window." Elias shifted slightly in his chair, his breathing slow but determined. "Adrian built safeguards into everything he created," he murmured. "If the second half of Nova is under that tree, it won't reveal itself easily. It will require intention and the right person." I felt everyone's eyes move toward me at once. A strange calm replaced the fear in my chest. The last 24 hours had stripped away every illusion I had carried about my family, my home, and even my name. But in their place, something steadier had begun to grow. "Then we go," I said quietly. "Before Hale realizes the answer isn't inside the house at all." My father looked as though he wanted to argue, yet no words came. Perhaps he knew he had already lost the right to make decisions for me. Rebecca gathered the documents from the desk and slid the tin box back into my hands. "Whatever your great-grandfather built, it belongs to you and Elias," she said firmly. "My job now is to make sure no one takes it from you." The drive back across town felt unreal. Snow still dusted the sidewalks, and the familiar streets looked almost peaceful beneath the winter sky. But when Daniel turned the corner onto my block, the illusion shattered immediately. 2 dark vehicles sat in the driveway, their engines idling softly. The front door still hung open. Daniel slowed the car and cut the headlights. "He's still here," he whispered. We left the car a block away and approached on foot, moving along the side street where the fence line hid us from the house. The old pecan tree stood near the far corner of the yard, its branches bare against the darkening sky. It had always looked ancient to me as a child, older than the house itself. Elias touched my arm gently. "This is where Adrian would sit for hours," he said quietly. He said the tree reminded him that truth grows slowly but roots deeply. The wind rustled through the branches as we reached it. Up close, the trunk was enormous, its bark ridged and scarred with age. I placed my hand against the wood, feeling its cold surface beneath my fingers. For several seconds, nothing happened. "Maybe we're wrong," my father whispered behind me. But then the tin box in my other hand vibrated faintly. I looked down in surprise as a thin golden glow spread across the metal lid. The same glow crept across the bark beneath my palm, tracing a faint circle that had never been visible before. The ground beneath the tree trembled softly. Elias's voice cracked with emotion. "He did it," he breathed. "Adrian actually did it." The circular outline widened slowly, revealing a narrow door concealed within the tree's trunk. As it opened, warm light spilled upward from a hidden chamber beneath the roots. Inside were shelves of old notebooks, sealed cases, and a single metal pedestal at the center. Daniel stared in disbelief. "That's been here the whole time." I stepped inside carefully, my breath catching as I realized the chamber felt untouched by time. On the pedestal rested a final envelope addressed simply, "For the future." Elias's hands trembled as he opened it. The paper inside carried Adrian Ward's familiar handwriting. "Truth chooses its guardians. If you are reading this, then the future still has hope. Protect what matters. Destroy what corrupts." For a long moment, none of us spoke. Outside the chamber, we heard distant shouting from the house, Hale's voice, furious now, echoing across the yard. He had finally realized where the real secret lay. Daniel looked at me. "What do you want to do?" I glanced at the notebooks and diagrams surrounding us. Adrian Ward had spent his life building something that could change the world, but he had also spent it protecting that discovery from people like Hale. Slowly, I closed the envelope and placed it back on the pedestal. "We protect it," I said, "the way he intended." Rebecca nodded. "And we bring the truth into the open so no one can bury it again." When police sirens finally approached in the distance, Hale and his men were already fleeing the property. They had chased power and found only a door that refused to open for them. By morning, the authorities, the courts, and the world beyond our quiet neighborhood would begin learning the truth of Project Nova and the decades of silence surrounding it. But standing beneath that ancient tree, watching the winter sky lighten slowly with dawn, I realized the most important truth wasn't hidden in the chamber at all. It was the moment I finally said my real name out loud, Maya Ward. Not the quiet daughter expected to surrender, not the sister expected to step aside, but the guardian of a legacy built on courage rather than fear. If this story moved you or made you think about the power of truth and the strength it takes to protect it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who believes in standing up for what's right, and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that remind us why integrity still matters. Sometimes the greatest inheritance we receive isn't money or property at all. Sometimes it's the responsibility to protect the truth when no one else will.